Everybody, I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Traffic Mobility Review Board. Before we begin, let me hand it over once again to Paige Graves, MTA's General Counsel, for some important meeting information. Paige?
Yes, thank you. The following rules of conduct and decorum shall apply to all members of the public attending this meeting. The TMRB reserves the right to remove anyone from the premises who violates the following rules. Meeting attendees shall be respectful to all others in the meeting. Attendees may not speak out, shout, make loud, disruptive noises, etc. Attendees may not use profanity or vulgar language or otherwise engage in conduct that disrupts the orderly conduct of the meeting. Attendees must remain in the public seating area. Thank you.
That includes the safety announcement. That's done.
There should be a safety announcement that will be heard at this moment.
Your safety is of the foremost importance to the MTA. Therefore, we ask that you listen and adhere to the following instructions. If you witness an emergency, notify emergency personnel in the room and call 911 immediately. Please follow any audible instructions provided through the public address system or visually on screens in the event of an emergency. If an alarm sounds, wait for a public address announcement and follow instructions. If told to go to another floor or to evacuate the building, leave all unessential items behind and use stairwell A just across the main hallway or stairwell B down the hallway past the elevators. If you have a mobility disability or cannot self-evacuate, please proceed to stairwell D or E for assistance by MTA staff or emergency personnel. An automated external defibrillator, AED, for use by trained personnel is in the main hallway just past the elevators. If you need assistance during an evacuation, please tell an MTA staff member or emergency personnel. Thank you and have a safe day.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Carl Weisbrod. I am the chair of the Traffic Mobility Review Board. I'm a former chairman of the New York City Planning Commission and former director of the city's planning department. Let me have my fellow board members introduce themselves, starting with, on my left, with John Banks.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Banks, former president of the Real Estate Board of New York.
And John Samuelson.
John Samuelson, International President, Transport Workers Union.
And Elizabeth Velez.
I seem to be challenged with my microphone, but Elizabeth Velez, President of the Velez Organization and TMRB member.
And Catherine Wild.
Kathy Wild, President of the Partnership for New York City.
And on a video link, we have John Durso. John, can you hear us and see us?
Yeah. Yes, I hear you. Good afternoon, John Durso, President, Local 338, and the Long Island Federation of Labor.
Thank you very much, and welcome all to the third meeting of the Traffic Mobility Review Board. The board was established pursuant to the 2019 MTA Reform and Traffic Mobility Act to make recommendations to the board of the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, an affiliate of the MTA, regarding toll amounts as well as potential credits, exemptions, and discounts to implement congestion pricing in New York City in the area south of 60th Street in Manhattan. In addition to our regular attendees, we are also joined today by New York City Transit's Senior Vice President of Subways, Demetrius Critchlow. Mr. Critchlow, welcome. And as with our previous meetings, we have asked Juliet Michelson to present today the major issues that we'll be addressing at this meeting. Juliet, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you to everybody for joining us today. Just recap quickly at our first meeting back in July. You remember that we discussed the role of the TMRB in setting the congestion pricing toll, and specifically we talked about the 7 types of recommendations that together are going to set the toll structure. At our second meeting, we explored how these recommendations are all interrelated because of the program's overall revenue target. Today, we're going to go one step further and combine different potential recommendations into distinct scenario, different combinations of recommendations for this group to discuss. The goal is not to choose a winning scenario, but rather to discuss different approaches that could be mixed and matched for a final recommended toll structure. You'll recognize up on the screen, you've seen this list before, the 7 areas that the TMRB needs to provide recommendations on. We'll get back to those in a minute. So let me first say that the 4 scenarios that we'll be presenting today reflect several key priorities that we have heard from you over the last several months. First, we've heard of your desire to keep the toll as affordable as possible while still meeting the program's goals. The scenarios we'll be discussing prioritize keeping the toll low, and to do that, they do that in part by limiting discounts and exemptions. You've expressed concern about unnecessary traffic diversions. The scenarios we'll talk about today try to reduce to a minimum the number of vehicles that will choose to drive around the CBD to avoid paying the toll. From day one, this board has asked us to prioritize equity, which is why these scenarios emphasize ways to help low-income residents of the region when they have no option but to drive to work. And lastly, you've asked for a toll structure that is rational and simple. The more people understand what they're paying and why, the better off the program will be, the better off the region will be. In particular, I know that several of you are concerned about the confusion that may exist today about when the toll would be charged. The legislation, you'll recall, says that the toll can be applied for entering or remaining in the CBD, but what that means isn't always clear. And so with your goal of keeping the toll as simple as possible in mind, you've asked us to consider charging the daily CBD toll only for entering the zone, not for remaining or leaving. After all, charging drivers as they enter, as they make the decision of whether to add to the congestion of the CBD, is the best way to influence their travel behavior. And it's common sense and easy to understand. Okay, so let's get to describing the scenarios. There are several variables you'll see that all the scenarios hold constant. The first is to charge trucks for the congestion that they cause. So we mentioned this in our last meeting, but just to be clear again, when we talk about trucks, we're not talking about vans or pickup trucks. Those are autos. In congestion pricing world, what we're talking about here are box trucks and large articulated trucks. In our last meeting, we considered the option of charging trucks in the same proportion as they are charged on existing tunnels, but we found in our analysis that tolls that high would result in too many truck diversions through environmental justice neighborhoods. So the scenarios we're talking about today charge trucks roughly for the space that they occupy on the street. That is twice the auto rate for box trucks, 3 times the auto rate for large articulated trucks. The scenarios we're looking at today all exempt commuter buses and specialized government vehicles. Commuter buses because they get people out of cars at the busiest times of the day in the CBD. Whether these commuter buses are publicly owned or privately owned but under contract with the government to provide transit service, these buses are a critical part of the region's public transportation network. Government vehicles designed to perform specific public works, we're talking here about sanitation trucks, street sweepers, asphalt paving machines, and so on, also have an important public purpose that is essential to the functioning of the CBD. Finally, the 4 scenarios include a deeper low-income discount than was committed to in the environmental assessment. While the EA specified a 25% discount on the daytime toll after the first 10 trips in a month, these scenarios include a 50% discount. So those are the things that are held constant. Now let's talk about the variables that change from scenario to scenario. First, crossing credits. Remember, this is the notion that drivers who are already paying a toll to take the Lincoln, Holland, Hugh Carey, or Queens Midtown Tunnel get a discount on the CBD toll. We've discussed this issue before, but since these crossing credits are literally the biggest driver of the base auto rate, I do want to spend a minute reminding ourselves of a few key facts. No crossing credit, that's to say no discount on the CBD toll, would mean it would cost some drivers $25, potentially $30 to enter the CBD, while it would cost others a lot less. But all drivers would pay equally for the congestion they cause in the CBD. With no crossing credits, the toll shopping that exists today on the East River would continue, but no crossing credits is the best way to keep the CBD toll low, because every driver would be paying it. At the other extreme, a large crossing credit would allow all drivers to pay the same to enter the CBD, no matter how they come in. But as we saw in the scenarios in the EA, that amount would have to be close to $23 for the math to work out, if a third of all vehicles get $14 off the CBD toll. So let's think for a moment about how a large crossing credit would affect drivers depending on where they are commuting from. If they're coming from Brooklyn and Queens, a large crossing credit would give those drivers more options. Those who were driving out of their way to take a free bridge and save money could take a tunnel for the same price. For drivers coming from New Jersey, a large crossing credit would add roughly $8 to $9 to the toll that they pay today. For drivers from Upper Manhattan and points north, who have been paying so far nothing to cross 60th Street, a large crossing credit would mean adding $23 to their commuting cost, a big jump from 0 to 23. And so what that would lead to, as you can guess and as we've discussed in previous meetings, is a huge imbalance between who adds to the traffic in the CBD and who contributes to the CBD toll revenue. So that's why you'll see that the scenarios that we'll be discussing together all provide a moderate crossing credit. They don't create full parity between entries, but they do help move things in that direction. Then the specific level of credit is something that we'll be discussing today as it varies between scenarios. Second, all the scenarios assume that taxis and FHVs are charged a per-ride toll instead of a daily toll. That's because per-ride tolls are more easily passed on to the customers who, after all, are the ones making the decisions to add to the traffic in the CBD. The amount of the per-ride toll varies between scenarios, and we'll be discussing that. And I'll just remind the group that along with crossing credits, what to charge taxis and FHVs is a critical recommendation because half of all vehicles in the CBD are taxis and FHVs. So this recommendation is a key driver of the overall toll. Lastly, we discussed in our last meeting extending the nighttime period. But as you'll see, just how long that nighttime period is varies between scenarios, as well as how deep the nighttime discount is. Okay, let's get into it. So just to orient ourselves first, at the top of the slide, you see those variables that are being held constant. And below in the green box, you'll see the variables that are changing between scenarios. So in this scenario, scenario number 1, we have a simple daytime-nighttime schedule where the toll would be full rate from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. and half rate from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. The crossing credit would be $7, basically half the cost of a round-trip tunnel toll today. Taxi, green cab, and black car customers would pay a $1.50 toll for any trip that touches the CBD. Customers of app-based FHVs would pay $2. The second scenario introduces a third time period between daytime and nighttime to help avoid a rush of drivers coming in at 4:45 before the daytime rate kicks in. Here we have a $5 crossing credit. And on the taxi and FHV side, we have a $1 toll for yellows, greens, and blacks, while app-based FHVs are charged $1.50. And because the CBD toll is discounted 50% in this scenario, here we also propose discounting the taxi and FHV tolls 50% in the nighttime. That's also the period where transit is less frequent, so there's a bit of common sense there. Scenario number 3 proposes a deeper discount in the nighttime, 75% between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. That's good for those who need to drive at night because transit options are more limited. It also reflects the fact that there is simply less congestion at night. Here again, the crossing credit is $5 as in scenario 2. And because the nighttime discount is on the toll overall is 75, here the crossing credit would also be reduced 75% in the nighttime. In this scenario, taxi, green cabs, and black car customers pay $1 per trip, and app-based FHV customers $2. Again, because nighttime tolls are reduced 75%, so are the taxi and FHV tolls. So that would make it a 25-cent toll for taxis overnight and 50-cent toll for app-based FHVs. But here's a new concept, that there would be an additional toll for app-based FHV trips that begin and end, that take place entirely within the CBD in the daytime. This is to reflect that in the daytime and in Manhattan below 60th Street, there is plenty of transit service. And finally, scenario 4, with this time a $4 crossing credit. We're back to 50% nighttime discount from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. with a reduced rate period on either end. And we're back to a $1.50 toll for taxis, $2 for app-based FHVs, with a 50% reduction in the nighttime. So these are the 4 scenarios that we're discussing today. They all meet the program's traffic reduction goals and revenue target. They also reflect the priorities of this group. And again, the goal today is not to choose any one of these scenarios, but simply to discuss them and advance our thinking. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Carl.
Thank you, Juliet. I have 2 questions. One, you raised the issue of charging only on entry, not on remaining in the congestion zone or leaving the congestion zone. I'm assuming as you look into whether that works in terms of meeting both congestion and revenue-generating goals, whether, I'm assuming that that will also be subject to the restriction that passenger vehicles can only be charged once per day.
That's
Is that
correct.
My second question is regarding motorcycles, which haven't come up before. All the scenarios assume charging somewhat more for trucks and even a little more for large trucks based on the fact that they take up more room on the streets by far than passenger vehicles or vans and pickup trucks. Motorcycles obviously have half the wheels of an automobile. Have we thought about what the appropriate charge should be for motorcycles?
We could charge them half to reflect the number of wheels. But that really is a decision of
I think that's the
this
first
board.
enthusiastic reaction we've ever had. Thank you.
We're talking about licensed vehicles.
Licensed motorcycles, obviously.
Right.
Thank you. I open up to questions.
I think I'll start. We've heard a lot about increasing ridership in the news of late. But how does that increasing ridership reflect on capacity or even operational readiness regarding implementation of this plan?
So, as you know, we're still far below pre-COVID levels, but I'll hand it off to Demetrius. Do you want to take this one?
So ridership right now is still down roughly 2 million from where we were pre-COVID. Pre-COVID, we were at roughly 6.4 million riders, and now, we're at 8.5 million. Now we're at roughly 6.4 million. But I think the reality is it's more than just what the ridership that we have today versus 2019. We have consistently added service, and I think we can't discount that at all. Additional service on across 8 lines, and then by next year, an additional 4 lines will have additional service. So, we have the capacity. Capacity is not the issue, and the service from where we were pre-COVID is not the issue.
Thank you, Mr. Gritchell.
Could you just clarify, this may just be me, but how does the nighttime credit work in both cases? The 75% is 75% of what? Or the 50% is 50% of what?
On the crossing credit you're talking about?
Well, on both. The nighttime discount, is that it's just confusing between what's a credit and what's a discount and what are we discounting off of?
I agree. The nomenclature is a little confusing. So in scenario 3, all scenarios contemplate a lower rate in the overnight, right, to reflect the fact that there's less transit and less congestion. For all 3 of these scenarios have a 50% discount at night. One of them considers a 75% discount at night. And if we're discounting the toll rate, what we're suggesting...
The discount is of the toll rate.
Of the toll rates for everybody, right, for autos or trucks. If we're discounting the toll rate for those vehicles, we're proposing to also reduce by 75% the toll rates for taxis and FHVs, and also the crossing credit, meaning the amount that drivers who are coming in through a tolled tunnel would get off of the CBD toll.
So you're reducing the credit by 75%, or you're reducing the toll by 75%?
Both.
But I guess my question would be, if we're on the 75% scenario, where we'd be reducing the toll to a relatively small amount. I'm not quite sure why we would even need a crossing credit. I mean,
That
it's
could
really a
be-
small amount.
That could be a recommendation of this board.
So at night, the toll is 25% of what it is in the day?
In the third scenario, that's correct. So if the daytime toll, let's say, is in order of magnitude, just to make the math easy, let's choose
Well,
$16. The overnight rate would be only $4. So in scenario 3, instead of a $5 crossing credit, we would reduce that to $1.25. I think Carl's point is.
I see. So you're reducing the toll, but you're also reducing the credit, so everything stays even.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
I got it. Thank you.
Can you, I'm sorry. Did I
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Can you explain or go over, clarify, what's the impact of the crossing credit on the East River bridges when they come into the district?
Sure. The higher the crossing credit, the less difference there will be in what it costs to enter the CBD between bridges and tunnels. Right now, there are 2 ways to enter the CBD that cost money and 4 ways that are
don't,
free.
right.
So the higher the crossing credit, the more equal it will be, the cost will be to cross all of those.
So no matter where you come from, Brooklyn, Queens, Long Island, or New Jersey, you will have the same effective toll.
Correct.
Right.
But
no
it
matter
will be
where-
high.
It will be high
Right.
or less high, depending upon what we decide for the credit.
Correct.
Got it. Thank you.
Just to follow up on John, irrespective of how you get into the CBD, your toll with the maximum crossing credit would be roughly the same. Is that?
Right.
And what that would mean, however, since basically the toll itself would have to be borne by, would be much higher.
Right. Those are
Right.
the infamous $23 scenarios are the ones that have a high crossing
Right.
credit.
And if you had zero crossing credit, it would be obviously painful for people who are currently paying to go in the bridges that are, and tunnels that have tolls. And the tolls would be, the base toll would be lower, but we wouldn't have any impact whatsoever on evening out traffic flows or evening out where people come into the CBD.
Right. The toll shopping that happens today would continue.
John Samuelson.
Yeah, you talked about capacity. Do you know what the capacity is on express buses right now? And borough by borough, if you have it?
In the Bronx, express buses are only 33% full. In Brooklyn, 38%. Queens, 29%.
And that's an aggregate of both ways?
No, that's peak.
That's peak.
But both ways, okay,
Peak
peak both
direction.
ways, though?
Yes.
Yes. No,
Okay.
peak direction, yeah. peak
In the
direction.
peak direction, both ways.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, and,
And Staten Island, 40%.
okay, is there an analysis done of when you talk about capacity on the subway lines, is there an analysis done of what lines are expected to absorb the vehicular commuters right now as they get out of their cars, on what lines that they're expected to get into as you talk about subway capacity being able to absorb all of this?
So I don't have that information, but what I can say is we're talking about between 70 to 110,000 people, right? But the subways has capacity for millions, right? So I get, respectfully, I get that we want to look at things a little more closely at, but there's a lot more capacity.
I know,
in
but
the
people
subway.
that live along the G line aren't driving a car into the city. You know what I'm saying? That's why it's an important question to me. Folks in downtown Brooklyn aren't the ones that are currently commuting, that we're trying to lure out of their vehicles. So I think perhaps a more important question is there enough capacity on the express buses to absorb vehicular commuters that we have an expectation that we're going to lure out of their vehicles and onto public transit. And if there's an analysis line by line of where the expected flow is going to come onto those train lines, it would make sense to me that that type of analysis would be done.
Yeah, sorry, John. So on the express buses, we have looked at that, and obviously there's opportunities as this comes into place to make changes as needed. But when you look at that, you see on the edges where, we'll do it by color code, it's all green, meaning there's excess capacity in those areas. And that's where I think the concern is as far as people late at night, early in the mornings. On the subways, just to really put it into context, I think it was about a week ago, we really celebrated the new record since COVID, and it was 4.179 million people. And that was a big deal. It's the most riders we've had since March of 2020. Well, the same date in 2019, we had 5.7 million riders, and there was no reports of overcrowding or people climbing on top of it. It was, it was a big day, but it's still 1.6 million less. So, as Demetrius said, it's the tens of thousands that we hope come onto the subway system. We do have the capacity, but we'll always, we've said this before, John, we'll always look at it as far as those specifics that you're talking about, like a G line or an express bus that starts to get crowding. Can we change so that we take care of any growth that is beyond what we expect?
Well, it makes sense to me that without having an analysis, that the commuters that are in the fringes of the outer boroughs, or the transit deserts, what have always been called transit deserts, that they are the ones that we're attempting to lure out of their cars and get onto public transit. So it would make sense to me that there could be an analysis that demonstrates what are the likely train lines that are going to absorb this flow of new folks, new commuters into the system, and then determine what the capacity is on those lines and on those express buses, and it would end a lot of speculation.
Well, I certainly think that it would be possible to see if there is, as John suggests, excess capacity on the G train right now.
Yeah, because general capacity doesn't mean anything. I mean, if there's capacity on a American airline flight from JFK to Heathrow, but you're not going from JFK to Heathrow, the capacity means nothing. Just because it's there, it doesn't mean that it's helpful.
So, I do want to note that we all recognize that the revenue generated through congestion pricing goes to capital and doesn't go to operating. But clearly, to a significant extent, investment in our capital ultimately affects our operating. And I mean, we just have to look at last Friday and the impact of that terrible storm on the MTA and subway system, and on Metro North and Long Island Railroad as well, and recognize how much has to be done to make our system more resilient. This is not the last major storm we're going to have. And likewise, and I just turn to you, Mr. Critchlow, but the extent to which signalization can proceed would enable, I assume, more trains and fewer headways or smaller headways on most transit lines that have modern signalization. Is that
Absolutely. CBTC, which we've talked about as the future of signal modernization, includes capacity. We saw that in the 7 line. Not only did we gain capacity, we also gained the performance that is stellar. It's still, at this point, is the highest performing line that we have. The L line, when we increased the capacity on the L line, increased service on the, we added CBTC on the L line. On-time performance shot up on the L line. So we recognize that modernizing the system, adding new technology does give us capacity, but it also allows us to operate better service than what we currently operate.
Other questions? I'm sorry.
I think, Alice, if we wanted to dwell on where these commuters who are currently driving what subway lines they would switch to, Allison, I think you've told me that the EA looked at that line by line.
Yeah, Chapter 4C and the associated appendices did the screening, not just for MTA, actually, across the region, looking at the commuter rail, the transit, and the bus to determine where they needed to do further analysis of the line, the lines themselves, and then the station elements. And you may recall it was found that where we had the problem, potentially, depending upon what scenario was used, that it really turned out to be more of a station element issue, which is why we have the mitigation specifically for certain stations throughout the system. But nothing was actually found to create any issues with thresholds on the lines themselves.
And that was at pre-COVID ridership levels? Correct?
That was at pre-COVID ridership levels, yes. So again, it's 4C and the appendix to 4C.
Paul?
Other questions?
Paul, I have a question.
Oh, John, go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Couple of things. One, the 4 scenarios all meet or exceed the what we in our guidelines on equity and with regard to the low income drivers and the protection of jobs. Am I correct on that, all 4 scenarios?
I'll let Juliet answer that more specifically, but I think that we've really, just in response to your concerns, response to John Samuelson's concerns, there's really been a focus in all these scenarios on the overnight hours and an ability to deal with that issue, and that's certainly an issue of equity, and certainly going beyond what the EA environmental assessment required in terms of discount for low-income drivers is another effort to do that. And if we can assure that we can only toll on entry and not on exit, I think that solves another big issue that you raised and that John Samuelson raised about the overnight worker having somehow to be subject to two tolls on the same shift, which is clearly would be an inequitable result. So I think in all 4 scenarios that is a major step forward. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Juliet.
You've said it perfectly.
Okay, so just as a follow-up to that, since we hit on those issues that were part of our rules or the system I would doing it, how does, and this is probably a little bit off topic, but that's how I ask questions, how do we then proceed with convincing drivers, besides the financial aspect of it, that the system is safe and secure for them to go on? I think so much, and I had talked about this earlier, that perception is reality. So how do we go about, well, how does the MTA plan about going about making sure that people understand that the system is safe and secure? And that they encourage them to do it besides the financial aspects of it?
It's a fair question. I'll turn it over to the MTA and Mr. Critchlow.
Well, I'll start, but, for John's question, I think the way you do it is by making it safer. This year, numbers came out last night. We're down 5% major crimes for the year, 10% for last week. So that's always, that is the right direction. That's the case because working very closely with the NYPD and Mayor Adams, more police in the subway system, but we're not stopping there. We've invested heavily in cameras. We have a heavy investment in cameras on the subway cars. And of course, when there is footage, the police track down the person they're looking for. But it's, you're right about perception. It's something we're fighting every single day. And, we're certainly not giving up on that. And as well as with our employee safety, that's, a top concern as well, because we, read and see stories, incidents that have happened, and it's unacceptable. So that's something we're heavily invested in, and we're making progress as the numbers show. Demetrius, do you have anything to add? No? Okay.
A related question, how are we doing on the almost 700 million a year in fare evasion?
So it's when we put out the report not too long ago, it involved a lot of capital investments in that area, and we've started looking into those. There's also a lot of changes in code that we're investigating as far as what we can do in the system. One of the top line there on our fare evasion on the subways is people walking through the gate. It's not jumping the turnstile. It's not shimmying through the turnstile. It's just walking through the gate because it's open. It's a serious issue. And that's growing. But look, the first is awareness. Secondly, we have to come up with solutions. Those solutions are we're making progress on them. But it's not limited to the subway system. It's a serious issue on buses, Kathy, and it's growing. Not too long ago, and Demetrius can speak to this, we hired more Eagle teams. Those are the teams that we've stationed them at bus depots, and importantly, we've put them with NYPD officers because, again, we found that our drivers who are leaving those depots, they're not in a position to enforce the fare. The Eagle teams are there to do that work but having the police on hand helps with that enforcement. So we're making progress in the area, but it's by no means, it's still an issue that is very serious and has a serious effect on our bottom line finances.
And John, just to follow up on Kathy's question and related to what John Samuelson, when he talks about express buses, is fare evasion a serious problem on express buses, and can that be prioritized, and is that a factor in passengers being reluctant to use express buses?
Yeah, okay, so I'll get back to you. I don't believe it's as big an issue on express buses. It's just a different, the way that it's more similar to like New Jersey Transit. The payment system.
It used to be more of an issue on the select buses.
Yeah, well,
right?
The select buses, it's a big issue because those are the buses where when we introduced them, you had all-door boarding where individuals would pay their fare at the bus stop, and then it would become some sort of honor system where they would be checked. It's, obviously that's been a problem. But less of an issue on the express bus.
Carl? Two quick questions, then they both relate to scenario 3, where we are suggesting in that analysis that the crossing credit could receive as much as 75% discount at night during the nighttime period. And the 75-cent surcharge for day-to-day intra-CBD trips for FHVs, that's purely you start and you end within the CBD, only during the daytime. And that 75 cents would be included in the passenger charge, not anything to the driver or anyone else. and that 75%, 75 cents, in essence generates enough revenue to cover the discount increase from 50% in the other scenarios. Is that fair for the FHV nighttime discount?
Yeah, that, I mean, there are other factors that change. For example, I mean, it also, the 75% nighttime discount also applies to the taxi and FHV.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Tolls. So yes.
I just wanted,
Sure, John?
do you know what the nighttime discount period is in London? What time it starts and ends? Does anybody?
It's a longer period than we have here. It starts, I believe, the daytime, well, why don't you tell us?
I don't know.
It is they have a longer overnight than we have here. But they're also less of a 24-hour city than we are. So
When you say longer, like,
I don't know the actual
Okay.
numbers.
We'll get,
We can get back to
obviously,
you.
Go ahead.
we will get back to you.
okay. Thanks.
Yeah, when too many people have their mics on, we can't hit them. But it's in the overnight in London, it's a non-charge. It's a charge during the congestion period, which is those hours, I think it's 6 to 6 or something like that.
6 a.m. to 6 p.m.
That's, we'll check, but
Okay.
that's what I understand.
Okay. Kathy?
Again, if we shortened that period or lengthened the overnight period a la London, if that's the case, it would raise the base tolls, just to be clear.
Yes.
Right, I think I'm just repeating what you said earlier, Juliet, but that here, everything is connected to everything else, in a sense. But the two biggest drivers, in a way, are the crossing credits and, to some extent, taxis, FHVs, because they make up such a large percentage of the cars on vehicles in the district. And everything else affects it a little bit, and each one can change other assumptions depending on which levers get pushed. But so just to John Banks' question, you can't exactly say that a 75% daytime surcharge makes up for X. It's just a contributor to the whole revenue generation in a way, and this still requires a little bit of analysis.
Yeah, every time we want to modify one element of
Right.
these scenarios, we have to recalculate everything, which we're happy to do, of course. But yes, we can't just change one element without looking at the
Right.
others.
Right, but again, the two biggest, and what the nighttime period is, I guess, but those are the major drivers here.
Those are, yes, they're,
Okay.
because they involve so many vehicles.
Anything, Kathy?
We're going to go on to the taxi and FHV?
Yeah. You want to add about taxi?
Are we going back to we're going on to the FHV?
Yeah. You want,
Excuse me. Excuse me, I think in the,
They're gonna get,
I just want to remind attendees, I just want to remind attendees that you need to be respectful to each other, as well as no loud outbursts, as you heard here, and disruptive, because you're disrupting the meeting for everyone, not just trying to get your point out. So if you can be respectful to the other attendees as well as the TMRB, we can get through this and you can get the information that you need. Thank you.
Okay. Kathy?
You said earlier that taxis and FHVs are about half the vehicles in the district. That's 24 hours a day, or that's during the heavy congested period?
This is Will's shop survey, so he will answer.
Hi, Kathy. We did a survey during peak periods, so the morning, the midday, and the PM, and found that about half of the traffic circulating on the streets of Manhattan are either taxis or for-hire vehicles.
And do you have a breakdown between taxis and for-hire vehicles?
That data comes from 2019, and at that time, it was roughly equal. We are in the process of working with our partners at the MTA to do an updated survey. What we believe has happened from some more limited data collection is that the proportion of FHVs has increased while the proportion of yellow taxis has gone down.
But we've also discussed that the frequency, the number of trips that taxis and FHVs make within the zone is different. Do you want to talk about that?
You mean in terms of what proportion of their total business?
No, I mean the taxis typically make an average of 12 trips a day.
Correct. So taxis, their business model is more dependent on the CBD. They typically are making, on average, 12 trips a day that in some way touch the CBD, while FHV vehicles, it's about half that amount.
So there are fewer taxis moving around more frequently?
Yes. Correct. This is all
But that's because
CBD.
the FHVs have most of the activity outside the CBD.
About 2/3 of their business is fully outside of the CBD.
Will, do you know, with respect to both taxis and FHVs, a breakdown of how many, what the percentage is of rides just within the zone, south of 60th Street?
Wholly within the zone?
Yeah.
The stats that I have at the ready, Carl, are for yellow taxis. About 3/4 of their total trips touch the CBD, while that number is only about 1/3 for high volumes.
No, my question really was, of those trips, what the breakdown is of trips that start and end in the CBD, not just touch the CBD.
Let me see if I can get that information for you.
Thank you.
I was going to ask. Will, and I just want to raise one thing we haven't talked about is, but I think you have data on, is the impact of tour buses, travel buses, et cetera, that are operating within the CBD.
Yes, so specifically around the issue of sightseeing buses. These are buses for tourists and visitors, get on, hop off, and see the sights. There are two agencies that are responsible for regulating these. The New York City Department of Consumer and Worker Protection licenses the businesses. My agency, the New York City Department of Transportation, reviews and approves the stops for these services. These services are required to have GPS devices and to kind of report their data to us that helps us to ensure that they're actually using the stops that we've given them. There are 704 total stops for these services. 381 of those are located in the CBD. As of this summer, July, there were 97 licensed sightseeing buses approved for pickup and drop-off on city streets, which is a decrease. Prior to the pandemic, there were about 175. In terms of the total proportion of buses in the CBD, the data from 2019, there were roughly 11,000 entries by buses. Now, obviously, those 97 buses do more than a single entry a day, but just gives you an idea of the proportions.
Sorry. How are those vehicles treated in these various scenarios?
So what we've discussed is the logic of charging them twice the auto rate, the same as.
Like a box
The
truck,
same as box trucks.
as opposed to the large articulated truck?
Correct. That's what we've discussed. We can revisit. We have not discussed, these do not assume a cap on the number of times they're told. So if they enter and multiple
No cap
times, they would be
necessarily.
charged
You could do
multiple
it.
times.
I just think they make a disproportionate contribution because of their stop and start and pickup, et cetera, and waiting on the curb, getting in front of public buses. I do think they make a disproportionate contribution to traffic congestion.
Will, do they, for the most part, their routes go in and out of the congestion zone? Or several times a day? Is that part of their route? Or is their route almost exclusively, if not exclusively, within the congestion zone?
Thank you. I think it's a mix, but I think it's fair to say quite a few of the routes do go in and out of the zone.
That's maybe the way to deal with it. Okay.
The only thing I would want to say about that, if you hit the tall buses, the visitor buses, as somebody said, these are solid jobs. I would really just love to see if there's any kind of impact, if anybody's looked at what the impact would be on these jobs. I mean, these are drivers that are making $30, $35 an hour in some cases. I would hate to see any kind of damage done to the tourism industry in New York City. It makes no sense to me. These are solid trade union jobs.
Yeah, Carl?
I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
Oh, John, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, once again, my dear friend, John, grabs my idea. He's much faster on the switch than I am. But yeah, these are good jobs. And do we have any idea what the economic impact is that these buses, these tour buses bring to the city and to the area? It just seems to me that one of the great things about New York is the fact that people want to be here. They want to tour, and these are very good jobs with good benefits. So I would be very hesitant to punish them for the work that they do.
Can I just add one more thing to that?
Sure.
When they leave the central business district, they frequently go to the outer boroughs to do things like go to Spumoni Gardens in Brooklyn with tall loads of people from Kansas and whatnot. They throw tons of money around in the outer boroughs. If you start slapping them with more than one charge a day, you're going to hurt outer borough businesses that get no Manhattan tourists whatsoever. But for these tour buses coming in, I would be adamantly opposed to hitting them with more than one congestion price, more than one toll a day.
I hear you. I think we need a little more information about the industry. And so, Will, we're going to turn to you since DOT regulates it.
Okay.
Okay.
I do have a follow-up for you. Of those taxi trips, the 75% that touch the zone, about 55% of those are wholly within the zone. Of the FHV trips that touch the zone, that was about a third. About 44% of those are wholly within the zone.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. Any other questions from any? Yeah, unless you have questions.
I would say, I just want to go back to the point that we were discussing earlier between capital and operating, and just distinguish between the overall issue of the implications, not just of congestion pricing in terms of changing transportation patterns, but remote work obviously has a big impact on changing transportation. New centers of employment, the fact that of the 29,000 new businesses created in New York City last year, Manhattan was the only borough without net gains in new businesses, and the activity was #1 Brooklyn, #2 Queens. So I think that John's consistent point about the need to look at the overall system, while not within the specific mandate of our congestion pricing charge of this board, is something that in terms of our recommendations to the MTA, we should consider recommending a larger look at this whole series of changes in our city post-pandemic and how we need to respond to it, because I think that point should not get lost in the fact that it's not on our list of specific assignments.
Fair point.
Mark this date on my calendar. Absolutely amazing.
Hey, Carl, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to respond to that point that
Okay.
Commissioner Wild just brought
Sure.
up. And Commissioner Samuelson, I just want to show you this list. This list I have on my desk. This is all the accessibility work that we have going on right now. 87 projects happening at over 80 stations happening right now. Over 30 of these are in construction. Half of these we've already contracted. I don't know if you've been keeping up with the news, but Jano, Jamie, Demetrius, and I have been out hitting the pavement. 7 stations this year alone already. That's the accessibility work that we're doing throughout the city. You mentioned the G line. The G line comes up here at least 3 times. We are doing work system-wide in all the boroughs. And after COVID, one thing that we did to showcase our agility to add more service, the governor gave us a couple $1 million more to add more service, and we undid those peak hours that we were used to have, and now we're adding more service all day round. We're doing the same things on the weekend, so we've already showcased the agility and our ability to be responsive to the need that we have in the community. I just showed you the work of accessibility happening system-wide. I'm telling you how we are rebalancing the service, those trains that we're moving. But I think a topic that's come up here time and time again is this catchy phrase that we throw around sometimes, transit deserts, which that just doesn't exist here in New York. It doesn't exist because every day we have over 30,000 trips for persons with disabilities from Staten Island to Bronxville to the Bronx. We move people 24 hours a day in a bus system that's been accessible before the ADA. And we're very proud of that, moving people, our most vulnerable New Yorkers, 24/7, in the needs that they require from us. So I'm very confident in our ability, our demonstrated ability to deliver the need that New Yorkers arise. You know, when we talk about service availability, to me, that's service accessibility. And we've showcased that this team that you have here, these guys that you have sitting here, Allison, are responsive to the needs of New Yorkers. You have the right people to do the job. We just need the money to continue to do what we've been demonstrating. And this capital plan, we've already demonstrated our intention. We have a legal document, federal document signed by the courts with the disability advocates to say that this team at the MTA is doing what they wanted to see so long. And we're asking to continue to do this. And if last weekend wasn't a demonstration of how much we need these additional fundings to continue on this capital plan, then I don't know what is.
Just to kind of echo kind of your sentiments, you know, we were hit with this epic storm on Friday. New York City was hit with an epic storm. And I just want to salute the great men and women of the MTA for not only mitigating the impact, but bringing the city back up to service so quickly thereafter. And so that point should be made right now. Thank you.
Amen to the people of the MTA and the hardworking staff. Thank you. Any other comments from anyone?
I would just like to respond to you. You seem to think I'm against this or something. I absolutely, totally recognize, probably more than anybody in the room from first-hand experience, the necessity for capital investment in the MTA system. 100%. Long before you came to the system, I was well aware of what derailments on these railroad tracks look like. So you should know that. I'm not talking about anything that you just spoke about. I'm talking about targeted service increases that will make this a transformational congestion pricing, once-in-a-generation move that will get people out of their cars and onto public transit. I'm well aware of the necessity for capital investment. I've lived through epic failures on these subway tracks for the last 30 years. And again, I know damn well the necessity and the need for capital investment into these tracks and into this bus system. So it's not about that. It's about whether or not we're going to use this moment in time to bring people out of their vehicles, change commuter behavior, get people out of their cars, and get them into public transit. That's what this is about, and that's what my criticism is about. It's not about anything you just said. I agree with what you just said.
Well, one way to do that, John, and certainly I think everyone here agrees, is this money is exclusively for capital. And that's what our statute says. That's what it has to be used for. And the more we invest and bring our capital plant up to a higher quality and hopefully the best quality in the nation, and one of the things, to Kathy's point, that's been apparent around the country is that the return to work is best with transit systems that are of high quality and get people to work on time. And after the nature of the work, that's probably the single biggest factor in getting people to return to offices. So our job, and well, safety and, well, the whole experience of transit and getting people to their offices. So our job here is to help the MTA provide the money in as equitable a way as we possibly can, in accordance with the principles that Juliet really laid out at the very beginning, which is do it at the lowest cost we can to the vast majority of people who are going to be affected, achieve equity, and meet the needs of the transit system, and have no impact on environmentally justice communities. So that's what I hope we'll do. And unless there are any other questions, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Adjourned.